Hi Bella Tony, let's start the Sino Vietnamese War Part 2. Hi Tony, when a strong country and a weak country go to war, does the strong country always win?
That's not true, Gina. Historically, when a strong country and a weak country go to war, the strong country does not always win. The same thing is happening in the recent war. Russia, a strong country, invaded Ukraine, but Russia is struggling against a weak country, Ukraine. Hi Bella, can you tell me if there is another example of a weak country winning a war against a strong country?
Yes, there are a few examples, Tony. In the war between France and Vietnam, Vietnam won, and in the war between the United States and Vietnam, the United States eventually gave up the war and withdrew from Vietnam. Gina, do you have another example?
Yes, Bella. It can be said that the war between China and Vietnam in 1979 was similar. The purpose of China's invasion of Vietnam was to compel the withdrawal of Vietnamese troops from Cambodia. However, despite Vietnam not withdrawing a single army from Cambodia, China claimed victory in the war. Is that right, Tony?
That's right, Gina. Since Vietnam did not withdraw a single soldier from Cambodia, it cannot be seen that China's purpose of invading Vietnam was ultimately achieved, nor can it be considered a victory for China. On February 17, 1979, China launched a blitz invasion of Vietnam, but it was the Vietnamese militia, rather than the main force, that fought courageously and skillfully.
The Vietnamese destroyed 13 Chinese tanks with Soviet anti-tank missiles on the first day of the war. The commanding ability of the Vietnamese army officers, who had accumulated a lot of practical experience, also surpassed that of the Chinese army. The Vietnamese army was able to quickly move and deploy soldiers to the required location, using the US-made M113 armored vehicles. If the Chinese forces attacked and were in a situation where the base would be taken, the Vietnamese army was able to quickly withdraw troops and put them into a new defensive line in the rear. In the process, the Vietnamese forces left some troops behind to stop the Chinese advance and give the Vietnamese time to redeploy. The Vietnamese troops left behind in many places fought relentlessly until they were annihilated and accomplished their mission admirably. Hi, Tony. What was the situation with the military equipment of the Chinese army? And are the Chinese soldiers well trained?
No, the military equipment of China was not in good condition, and the Chinese army was not well trained. In fact, China, which had just emerged from the turmoil of the Cultural Revolution at the time, did not have the resources or time to modernize its military. And the Chinese military had not made great progress in improving basic equipment and developing tactics after the Korean War. China even abolished military ranks. For example, there were positions such as platoon commander and company commander, but it was difficult to exercise leadership because they were equal to enlisted soldiers rather than officers. The Chinese army, who belatedly grasped the reality, panicked and poured only huge shells toward the Vietnamese positions, but failed to do much damage to the Vietnamese soldiers hiding in the trenches. Barely able to break through the target point even after 4 days of massive attacks, the Chinese replaced the local commander and added 100,000 troops. Did the Chinese military add 100,000 troops? The Chinese military also seems to be trying a human wave strategy. Right, Bella?
That's right, Tony. With a massive offensive resembling a human wave strategy, Chinese forces managed to capture the Vietnamese border towns of Dong Dang and Mong Khai on the 24th of February. The Chinese army, having achieved its first success, stopped advancing for a while to distribute supplies. Then the Vietnamese army immediately counterattacked, and on February 28th, the Vietnamese army surprised the Chinese and recaptured Dong Dang. The fact that Dong Dang was taken by this Vietnamese counterattack came as a great shock to the Beijing leadership. Although only one Vietnamese regiment was stationed in Lang Son, they fought desperately to defend the city. Both sides fought really hard, Tony. Tony, how long did it take for the Chinese to fully control the city?
It took 3 days, Bella. After 3 days of intense urban combat, the Chinese army finally took full control of the city on March 6th, declaring its intention to teach Vietnam a lesson and ordered a withdrawal. The Soviet Union's threat to send guerrilla troops across the border also played a big role in China's end to the war. Prior to the withdrawal of troops, China thoroughly destroyed railways and roads, Vietnamese military positions, and major industrial facilities in Lang Son and Lao Cai, as if in a scorched earth operation.
Oh my God, Tony, it sounds like a nasty attitude for the Chinese military to withdraw while destroying infrastructure. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, but what can we do, Gina, because it's the war?
In this war, both the Chinese side and the Vietnamese side claimed that they had done a lot of damage to each other. Western military experts estimate that each side suffered more than 60,000 casualties, including more than 25,000 dead. In just over 15 days of war, China suffered damage equivalent to almost half of the deaths the United States suffered in the previous 10 years of the Vietnam War.
Tony, it appears that the Chinese army incurred significant casualties due to a tactic known as the human wave strategy, which the Chinese military is known to employ. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. I totally agree with you, Gina. However, the Chinese leadership boasted that they had won the war regardless of the number of casualties, citing that they had the initiative throughout the war. Henry Kissinger, visiting Beijing shortly after the end of the Sino Vietnamese War, asked Deng Xiaoping, "Wouldn't it have been much better to advance deeper?" However, Deng Xiaoping blustered continually, saying, "We could have taken Hanoi if we had wanted to, but we just didn't." The Vietnamese side also claimed that the reason the Chinese army withdrew was because they could not handle the huge losses, and that the Vietnamese laid out a red carpet without blocking the way for the invaders to leave. In fact, China's real objective was to withdraw Vietnamese troops from Cambodia, not capture a few towns along the Sino Vietnamese border.
However, when China suffered huge losses that far exceeded expectations during the war, it had to withdraw voluntarily before achieving its goal out of fear of a counterattack by the Vietnamese army. It was tantamount to frankly admitting that the Chinese military could not subdue Vietnam no matter what military capabilities were used. Although the intention of the Chinese invasion was to withdraw Vietnamese forces from Cambodia, in reality, the Vietnamese forces did not withdraw a single soldier from Cambodia, so the Chinese invasion could be regarded as a complete failure.
Against the Chinese army, which mobilized more than 300,000 regular troops, the Vietnamese army, except for some units, successfully defended only with local troops and local militias, including women. This fact alone made Vietnam successful. The war was not a failure at all and left a big stain on China's modern history that Deng Xiaoping had never experienced.
China and Vietnam are neighboring countries that at times have cooperated and supported each other. However, they have also engaged in wars, resulting in significant human and property losses. Historically, when a country invades another, it tends to be a neighboring country. Consequently, it is often believed that alliances should be formed with distant countries, as it can be challenging to maintain peaceful relations with immediate neighbors. If Vietnam were to seek advice, forming an alliance with the United States could potentially enhance its safety and security. It is an iron rule of diplomacy that there are no eternal friends or eternal enemies between nations, only eternal interests.
Thank you for watching the video, The Sino-Vietnamese War Part 2, provided by History and Current Events. Gina, Bella, and Tony have contributed so far as narrators. Thank you.